Hi from cold Cape Town.
Hi.
We're recording this podcast from Cape Town. You can see our scenery is a little bit different today.
Not the usual scene, yeah.
And we decided to talk about something called effective meeting principles. So this is kind of a new concept that we've started to implement at FiveFriday. And we see great value in it, but we're in a trial period and we're trying to get feedback on it. So just to kind of explain what the effective meeting principles are all about and why we decided to use them. And then some other concepts will come up as they usually do in our podcast as we're talking about these effective meeting principles.
Okay, cool. So, look, meetings are a part of work life.
Yeah.
We know that we're not going to be able to do away with meetings altogether, and they have their place and they function. We do get value from them. It's about making sure that we extract the maximum value from them and not waste any time.
Yeah.
So that led us to just looking at what we can put in place as guidelines to make sure that we that we do our meetings as effectively as possible.
Yeah.
And you're much better qualified than I am to just quickly run us through what they are.
So one of the main principles of it is the agenda, that there must be an agenda for every meeting.
Yeah.
The idea behind that is that if you're calling people away from their desks, they need to understand why they need to be away from their desks and what the purpose of that is and what value they're going to add to the process or by being in that meeting. So part of the agenda is to have a meeting purpose clearly stated in one sentence, what the reason for the meeting is. Obviously the attendees that are involved in the meeting. And there's a meeting style, and we use 3 styles, which we'll chat about in a little bit. So you can pick from 3 styles, but we do also encourage people to say if their meeting doesn't really fit any of those 3 styles, let's talk about what else it could be. And then quite an important part is the discussion points. So a list of items that they plan to talk about in the meeting and plan to cover in the meeting, and assign time to each of those items. And then one of the main principles that we're trying to implement, which is it's a little bit slow on the adoption, is to make sure that your meeting, if it's set for an hour, that your discussion points add up to 5 minutes less than that, so add up to 55 minutes. So the aim is to always end 5 minutes before, because we know people's time is precious. They've got a lot of other work to do, and we don't want to keep them longer than that hour that they've planned to be away from their desks.
Yeah.
So that's
and the other important reason why we want the time to add up to the 55 minutes, if it's an hour meeting, is that you have the last few minutes to kind of complete the meeting minutes, and the important part of what the action points are. So who's going to do what by when?
Yeah.
That must be concluded by the time that the meeting finishes.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, it's a trial. I think we've only been doing it for just over a month that we've been trying to use this in our meetings. And then just to talk a little bit about the 3 styles. So the first one is information share, which I think is pretty straightforward. So either top down or sideways or bottom up or whatever the information share is. It's just sharing information with the rest of the team. The second one is creative discussion. So it's where you're brainstorming and trying to come up with a way forward. And usually a decision is not necessarily reached in that meeting. It could be that the key stakeholders will reach a decision afterwards based on what was discussed.
Yeah.
And then the third one is consensus decision, where you know that a decision has to be made by the end of the meeting. And the aim of the meeting is to discuss all the options and come up with that decision. And in that one, we talk a little bit about conflict. And it's also something that we've tried to make standard in all of the meeting styles and in all of our meetings. And it's a standard point on our agenda is the POT principle, which is the unfiltered, passionate debate in pursuit of the truth. So the POT stands for pursuit of truth. And we want people to disagree with one another and to view their perspective and their points of view, to express their points of view, to try and get to the best outcome for the team. So we call it disagreeing for the good of the team. We don't see a lot of it at the moment.
Not yet, but I think the fact that we add it as a reminder definitely has some benefit.
Yeah.
we're definitely seeing in smaller meetings or one-on-one meetings that there's more of that happening.
Yeah.
So it will definitely take a little bit of time for everyone to get comfortable in our bigger group discussions.
Yeah.
But even there, I mean, we've had cases where we've seen much better participation from people that normally would have been very quiet in meetings. And there's enormous value in that. We hear some great ideas that are coming out of people, ideas that would otherwise not have been put on the table and that would not necessarily have been considered in making a decision.
Yeah. And I think, it comes from one of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is a podcast we've spoken about before, is overcoming that fear of conflict. So it's something that we really want to encourage. We want people to be involved in conflict and express their opinions and disagree with one another if it's going to help us come to the best conclusion.
Yeah, conflict in pursuit of the truth.
Yeah.
So it's a nice kind of conflict.
Yeah.
It is where we respect each other. We don't get personal.
Yeah.
But if we have differences of opinion in terms of what is the better way to approach a specific task or whatever, is that we're comfortable to voice our opinions.
Yeah. Well, the way that we word it in our effective meeting principles, and we talk about this specifically with the consensus decision meetings, is we say that once concluded, so once the decision's been reached or decision's been made, is all feelings and conflicts must be left in the meeting room. And you don't take that out of the room and talk about it further. Once that decision's been made, you all need to kind of agree that you're going to follow that path and that's the point. So even if you disagreed in the meeting, it's great. It helped you come to the conclusion that you came to, and then everyone needs to be on board with the decision that was made.
Which is crucial.
Yeah.
Even though my viewpoint may not have been the one that that eventually was decided as the way forward, I then have to commit with the rest of the team and give my full cooperation.
Yeah. And again, that's one of the 5 dysfunctions which we've spoken about, is that commitment and the buy-in and the way-in and all of those things.
Correct,
so we need to really overcome all of those.
Yeah. So in theory, it sounds great to say that all emotions and so on must be left in the meeting room. Well, I've never seen anybody who's actually able to unload emotions and leave it in the meeting room. Because we're dealing with humans, I think it's something that will come with practice.
Yeah, and I think, I've said this to you before, I think one of the things, is we're all on the same team and we all have the same goal. We're all working towards the best outcome for the team. So if that is what everyone's intention is, then the conflict should be positive and should get us to the best solution. So
that's a valid point, and I think something that we often, just in the kind of the heat of the debate or whatever, lose sight of. Is that ultimately we are there for the same reason and for the same purpose. And it's good to remind ourselves of that. Because then I think also people will be a bit more comfortable to say, okay, cool, we're here for the same reason. We want the same. We want the best for the team or the best for the project. And therefore, whatever conflict comes up in this discussion or difference of opinion is for that purpose.
Not to get defensive, but if you truly believe in your point of view, to be able to voice that and speak up and explain what your reasons are for that. And obviously, if your reasons are good, you'll convert people.
You will, and I think the responsibility of everyone in that meeting is if I don't agree with your opinion, then instead of just trying to push my agenda, is to ask clarifying questions.
And have an open mind.
Yes. Ask why. What do you know that I don't know? So we've spoken about, or we mentioned that the thing about assume positive intent. If I assume that you have positive intent, then I'll be more inclined to listen to your point of view. You're not disagreeing with me about something just for the sake of disagreeing. I hope not.
Yeah.
But and then just try and understand from all angles.
Yeah.
So I often use the analogy of the beach ball. Those colored plastic beach balls. So if we each stand on a section of that beach ball, and I ask you, what color is it where you are? You may say, well, it's green. And I look down and it's blue.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that
it's
you're
not
wrong.
Green.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is kind of where I am, and from my viewpoint,
Yeah.
that is what I see, and this is my reality.
Yeah.
And I think if we a little bit more aware of that, it will help people. I don't necessarily have to disagree with you and state, well, I disagree with you. I can, through asking clarifying questions, and then based on what the feedback is I get from you, I can raise my opinion.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be full on conflict.
Yeah.
So I think those are kind of tips which I think people must just keep in mind when we engage in a conversation like that.
Yeah. So then we've kind of gone a little bit off track with our meeting principles, but I think this is an important topic to talk about. But going back to that is the way that we want to encourage people to do it is just to make sure that we're doing it all the time, as often as possible, sending out the agenda, making sure we've made everyone aware. Another point of that is so that all of the meeting participants can be prepared for the meeting and know what they're going into, so that they're ready with their point of view to be able to speak up in that meeting and express it. And then I just think super important is to remember the POT principle, which is very easy. POT principle, the pursuit of the truth. And if we're all going in there with that in mind and we're prepared for the meeting, we know what's going to be spoken about in that meeting, and we have our viewpoints, then we're going to come to the best conclusion in those meetings, and that's what we want.
Yeah, so in the beginning you said that we've only just implemented this. We've been running with this for just over a month, and we still have some way to go. But we have already seen much more effective meetings.
And many more people speaking up.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we've also seen in all types of meetings. We've seen it in meetings that include many people, groups of up to 10 and more. But we also see the efficiency of that in one-on-one meetings, where we can have a much more focused discussion, and we can really focus on the time allocated, and it forces you a little bit to get to the point.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the POT principle, and another acronym that we can really include there is the STM.
Yeah.
Let's talk about shit that matters.
Yeah.
And really by focusing, we've had some positive results.
Yeah. Well, I think just our one-on-one meetings have been so much more effective by focusing on those STM points. And we know that we only have 10 minutes to talk about something that is quite important. So we get it out of the way very quickly without waffling and going into,
And the other important thing is, I'm not sure we want to admit that, but by doing the agenda and looking at the time that we're going to need to discuss anything, we realized that our regular weekly catch-up was actually way too short.
Yeah.
We had to extend that.
Yeah.
But since we've done that, those meetings have been a hell of a lot more effective.
And I also think that the more that we have with those agendas and knowing how much time we can spend on things, the more efficient we get and the shorter they need to be in future.
Correct.
Because we're so much better at getting to the point. Not so much in this podcast. We don't have an agenda for this.
We don't have an agenda for this. And I think the other thing that's also really worked well for us is by the time that we conclude that meeting, within half an hour, whatever, I get an email with these are the action points.
Yeah, and next week's agenda.
Yeah. So that really works well for kind of those recurring meetings where we know we have another meeting in a week's time. We can prepare that agenda a week in advance. Doesn't mean that we may not want to amend that agenda, which is fine.
Throughout the week. And we've got
But
the
we
time
know
to do
what's
that.
coming, we know what to prepare for.
Yeah.
And just the fact that those action points are there, we carry those over. We've really seen that improve the efficiency.
Yeah.
And if that works well in a one-on-one meeting, I mean, it must have enormous benefit in the bigger meetings as well.
Definitely. So let's focus on unfiltered, passionate debate in pursuit of the truth. We're all on the same team. Let's get more efficient and better at the meetings. And we'll speak to you again next week from Joburg.
Thanks.
Thank you.